Welcome to tonight's show. And my provocative comment this morning on Facebook was something like, we were talking generally about visualization, and bland visualization, which is the only type that most people have heard of, let alone use, is one thing, but it doesn't really cut the mustard. You need something that's far more vivid than that. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about in just a couple of minutes. But the first thing I want to say is there's three words that really could sum up this show and pretty much every show thereafter. Well, not quite, but they would go a long way. I mean, let's just say you could talk about these three words for a long time. And these three words are thoughts become things. And I'll say that again because I've got to spin it out a little bit. Now it's 6 words. Thoughts become things. And these words resonated with me when I watched the video of The Secret. And you'll have heard of The Secret, most of you, I guess, presented by Rhonda Byrne. And it was a best-selling book and a best-selling video and film. And then they must have been greedy because it was also a best-selling audiobook. So that tells you that it wasn't just me who resonated with bits and pieces of that, but it was millions of people around the globe. And to me, there was many things in The Secret, but to me, if it had to be summarized in a paragraph, that would be it. Thoughts become things. Because And I could make the same comment really as well, only as a very general comment, about the book Think and Grow Rich, which you might have heard of, written by Napoleon Hill shortly after the Great Depression, I believe. And that sold, last time I checked, about 35 million copies. And that book really was written in very flowery language, lots of elegant examples, metaphors of how you might use your mind to gain some kind of insight into a rapidly changing world. But again, you could say, if you had to summarize it, that thoughts become things. So what does that really mean? Well, other people would have taken those words, and I know also that some of you would be familiar with this, and they would say, it's the law of intention. It's getting your thoughts together, having an idea of what it is that you want in life, and then bending down and putting your boots on, because that's always the hardest thing, taking the first step. And the reason why it's important to have a picture is because the brain thinks in pictures. Of our conscious mind, a very high proportion of that is taken up with cells that somehow or other are involved in transmitting our thoughts into pictures in our head. And when I work with elite performers and we talk about visualization, I often will not use the word visualization, but I used to call make magic movies, the 3 M's, make magic movies. And if you can't see the picture of what it is that you want to achieve in life, or what you want to achieve in one day, then the chances of that actually happening for real, if there is such a thing as real, are very much less. So putting yourself into the picture is quite important. Just when I say, if you're going to do something, putting yourself into the game is quite important. You know, you can't complain if you haven't won the lottery, if you haven't bought one ticket. But funnily enough, there are some people who do complain about that. But as we know, we live in a very diverse culture. The arc of our personalities is just about infinite. So you'll always get a few sort of outliers like that. And the interesting thing about visualization and the power that it occupies is that there are some people who have been born blind or have had blindness thrust upon them through illness or through accident. And there's one It was a BBC documentary on this just a few years ago that I still remember pretty clearly. And it was about this young man, adolescent, I guess you would say, who was riding his bicycle. And there's nothing very strange about that, except that he was blind, totally blind, and he was driving his bicycle through traffic. And they called him the Bat Boy because as he was riding, he would be making clicking noises, just like a bat would do. And the way he was able to navigate was because he was getting the echoes, and he could turn his spatial awareness and calibrate it all just by the echoes that he was getting. So that's, if anybody needed another example of the miracle of the brain, that is certainly one. And these kind of observations that people have made have forced a re-examination of the way that our brain works, because certainly when I was a medical student and a doctor, we had to learn little maps of the brain, and we were said, okay, well, this is Broca's area, this is the bit that controls speech, and there were many other bits of the brain that we had to learn. And the theory was that if you damaged a part of your brain that was involved in that particular function, then that would be gone, sadly, and gone forever. But the good news is that now the scientists recognize, and of course they can do this fantastic imaging now, and they can actually see which neurons are sparking at any particular time. And they've coined the word elasticity. They say that the brain or the brain cells are very elastic. And whilst we all might have been born with a lot of cells devoted to the visualization process, in a blind person, these cells have been recruited for another function. And that was what the Bat Boy has done. He has learned to click like a bat and joined all those dots together and can navigate himself safely through traffic. And good luck to him, although I wouldn't recommend that he take a cycling holiday in London at any time. He'd need to be more than a bat to survive that, I think, until they finally get themselves sorted out and bikes are separated from traffic, which is what they're trying to do now. Which is a good idea, because if you're in a car now in central London, it is actually easier to dump your car and walk. You'll get where you want to go a lot quicker and a lot safer. But anyway, people still like to drive their cars for some reason in the middle of the city when they're not moving. So what does this mean to us? Well, there's a couple of things, really. First of all, I hope that none of you ever have an accident and have brain damage or a stroke or something like that. I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but unfortunately, plenty of people do. As we get older, mainly when we get older, we get more likely to those illnesses that can cause strokes. And of course, young people have always been very active, and they're often taken risks, and they've ridden motorcycles, and one day they've taken a risk too much and they've had a head injury. So I've seen plenty of these things in the emergency room. Fortunately, it doesn't happen to many people, but it happens to enough people. And once again, we have on occasions seen recoveries from serious injuries that are close to miraculous. I don't think that would be too strong a word. And the doctors are aware of that, and they know that these things happen occasionally. And somehow these cells, through their elastic nature or some other function, these people have been able to regain some function, sometimes years after the original insult to their brain. So if you know anybody who fits into that category, then obviously don't give false hope, but there's always a little hope there. And the harder they sort of try and do their exercises, and the more they try to recover their speech, sooner or later, if they are lucky, these neural pathways will join up and start to become myelinated, as that's the word they use. Just like when we learn how to ride a cycle when we're children, we spend a lot of time falling off, which plenty, a Martian looking in would say, why is this kid falling off his bike and injuring himself and getting back on and doing it again? But of course, the kid knows that if he persists, sooner or later, these neurons are going to join up with each other, and he will get this sense of balance, and or she, and know how to ride their bicycle. So that's kind of like a very overgeneralized, relatively current view of the way that scientists think that the brain works. So back to more what we can do, back the visualization process. I knew this was my second career as a mind coach, although my first career did as a medical doctor did overlap, actually, funnily enough, in some places, because I'd always been interested in the way the mind works. But when I first started working with sports people, including some very good sports people, I recognized that visualization was a very fertile area. In fact, at that time, I probably would only talk about 3 things, and maybe that was better. Maybe I spent all the years afterwards just overcomplicating something that didn't need to be overcomplicated. But I used to talk about the importance of internal dialogue, the right kind of internal dialogue, and ways that we can train ourselves to be a little more constructive there. And so I used to call that talk tender. I always wanted to find things that people would remember, so TT, talk tender. And the second one was CC, which meant create confidence, because you can't do much in any walk of life, let alone as an elite performer, unless you have confidence. And confidence, as we know, is something that we don't have, but everybody else does. And of course, everybody else is thinking that they don't, and we have. So I don't think anybody ever feels totally confident about anything. And if they did, that's probably quite a dangerous thing for all of us. So we've always got a little bit of apprehension, but there's a difference between a little bit of an apprehension, which kind of sparks our hormones and our neurotransmitters and improves our performance, and too much, which leads to stress, anxiety, performance anxiety, people sometimes call that, which, you know, as the name says, takes away from our performance. And then the third one was the 3M, which I've mentioned, the make magic movies. Now, I think I mentioned in the show last week, we talked about how thought arises from the reptile swamp of our mind. It's formless. At best, it might give us a feeling that things aren't quite right, or a feeling that things actually are quite good. And of course, because of the way we are, this isn't enough. We have to put words to it so that we can talk in words inside our head to ourselves and to other people. And that can be when all of the ambiguity, the gross deletion of many of these thoughts that don't fit the picture, and the distortion, because everything we think, our ego is going to shape it to its own will. So the visualization thing, it seems to me that for many people, our default skill when we make movies is we make the horror movies. We always make movies of worst case scenarios. We have anxiety about things in the future that haven't happened. Now that Martian looking in would say, what's wrong? With these crazy people? They're stressing themselves stupid about something that hasn't happened. Why don't they worry about the things that already have happened, or the things that are going to happen the next second, rather than worrying about stuff next week, next month, next year? And of course it is curious, but I don't suppose any of us can really change that. But what we can do is make those movies a little kinder to ourselves. So when people have a project or an ambition or a goal, and of course we have to be careful with what we wish for, but if that's what they really want, then I teach them how to build that movie in their head. And one of the first clients that I saw, he was actually a golfer, but he didn't come to see me about that. He was really sort of dissatisfied with his life. And if I told you that he was mega wealthy and had various properties dotted around the world, and from what I could tell, a beautiful wife and 2 wonderful kids and a very nice Labrador dog. I mean, I know all these things because he would either visualize them to me or show me the actual pictures. And the reason why he wasn't happy, he couldn't actually put his finger on it because he had what has seemed to most people pretty good life. And certainly he didn't need to worry about money like most of us have to. He was pretty much made, you would say. But the funny thing is, he's not alone. There are many people who are in that situation. And it took me probably longer than it should have done because I got him to describe all of these pictures of what he wanted in his life, what he had in his life, the kind of changes that he would like to make in his life, which actually were pretty simple because he obviously didn't want to change any of those good things, but there was something missing. And it finally occurred to me to ask him a question. I said, "Where are you in these pictures?" He said, "Well, I'm obviously there." And I said, "Well, no, you've told me about your 2 children and your wife and your house and your BMW, but where are you?" And his face almost like went white. And then he said, "I know what you mean. You're saying to me that in all these pictures, I'm not in them." And I said, "Well, yeah, I am. I know it sounds pretty simple, but that's exactly what I'm saying." And he was astonished. But I can tell you that it made a difference because the next time I saw him, he'd been practicing all his visualizations and making sure that he was there. So if you're working with clients and you're talking about visualization, it's always a good place to check. Just like I said, one of my throwaway phrases is, you won't get what you want unless you put yourself in the game. So sportsmen use visualization quite a lot. And as I mentioned, what I wrote on Facebook this morning was something like, don't choose a bland visualization. So I'm just going to wrap up this little session and I'll give you some examples of visualizations that I don't think anybody would describe as bland. And these are the kind of visualizations that probably a lot of people wouldn't tell their coach about, because they would, first of all, to have a coach, a mind coach at all, is regarded with some suspicion in many sports, and sadly so, because the sports that do have mind coaches and the athletes that do tend to do a lot better than the ones that don't. And so I'll give you an example of, Jack Nicklaus, the golfer. For those of you who don't know nothing about golf, he's won more major tournaments at the moment than any other. He used to, after he'd played a game of golf, a round of golf in a competition, that evening he would lie on his bed before he went to sleep, and he would go through the round in his head. He would play a movie, and he would make a note of the bad shots that he'd played. And in his movie, he would just scrub those out. So within a few minutes, he'd got this movie of him playing 18 holes of golf with no bad shots. And that's how he went to sleep. And I guess he felt pretty good about that. And he was so good that he actually did believe it, fake it till you make it, as they say, because people would come up to him and say, have you ever missed a really, really short putt? Something like this. And he'd say, no, never, never, ever. And people would say, well, look, I saw the TV. I saw a recording or something the other day, and you did miss one. And he would be adamant, no. And that wasn't an act, I'm guessing. I think it's because he really believed it, because he'd got really great visualizations. And in one of his books, this is not his exact words, but he said, I never hit a shot, even in practice, without a very clear picture of the big white ball on the bright green grass, where I wanted it to go. And then there's a kind of a fade out where I can look down on myself hitting that shot and the ball goes there. So he made sure that he was in that picture. Now, when we talk about sort of visualizations like that, we would say, technical word, you don't need to know it, but I'll throw it in. We would say that he was seeing a dissociated image of himself. Now, if an associated image is when you see it through your own eyes, Disassociated is when it's like a camera looking at you and you're watching the video on the screen. So he was doing both. He started off by the associate. Well, I guess he wasn't, perhaps didn't see himself at the beginning, but he saw the ball, and then he disassociated and he saw himself. So bottom line here, put yourself in the picture, because you just might be surprised. Your mind's so active, so many thoughts, 70,000 thoughts a day, and you're not in the picture, because if you ain't in the picture, it won't happen. So that was a pretty, pretty strong visualization. But there are others as well. I've had players who tell me they imagine that like their ball is a rocket and they can see flames flying out of the back of the ball, and they're visualizing that in their head before they hit it. And then another player told me that when they were on the putting green trying to get the ball in the hole, the final shot or something, she was a lady on the ladies tour. She imagined like a trench opening up in front of her, and all she had to do was just hit the ball, and the ball would follow the trench, even going left and right with the contours of the green, and it would end up in the hole. Of course, it didn't end up in the hole every time, but her putting statistics were pretty good. And she probably wouldn't have told too many people about that. So there we are, some thoughts on visualization, how the brain's elastic, how the brain can myelinate new behaviors. Myelinate makes them, more and more wrapped in myelin, so that the neural impulses transmit faster and faster. Putting yourself in the picture, making sure you're in the movie, preferably in the middle, not on the outside. So that was my sort of my opening gambits for tonight to share with you. And of course, this is the stage where I welcome your comments on what I said, or anything that you've noticed interesting that you've picked up since our last show a week ago. So it's over to you.
Thanks, as usual. You mentioned bland visualization. How would you define that? And for you, what term would you use for the opposite?
Well, a bland visualization, thanks, Andrea. You've just reminded me of something that I thought I might slip in somewhere today. And you've prompted me with just the right answer. I know you don't know that. I think obviously the universe is behind both of us at this moment, which it's got to be good. So a bland visualization would be a pretty fuzzy picture in our head. We wouldn't have thought about it too much, so we wouldn't have added much detail. It would be quite a long distance shot. It might be in color, but if it was, the color would be drained. It could even be black and white. It could be pretty much out of focus. That would be bland. And something more vivid, more enticing, more charismatic, because I think that means actually more colorful, or more bizarre as a metaphor, like digging the trench to put your ball down there. And in NLP terms, they call these things submodalities. So we've only got the 5 senses, and we've mentioned already that vision is almost certainly the most important one of those. The things that I've just mentioned there are the submodalities. We can have color, or we can have black and white. We can have big, or we can have small. We could even have a picture that's, out of focus, sharply in focus. A picture that's even a bit tilted on one side. And a therapist can play with those things, but so can anybody. You can do this one yourself. Obviously, the kind of visualization that I'm wanting for something good is going to be big, right in front of my eyes, like bigger than my eyes can see, panoramic almost. It's going to have bright colors. It's going to be crisp in focus so that every detail is there. And if somebody has maybe got a phobia, for example, where all they can see is a spider big in front of their eyes, as in therapy, a little bit of light trance helps the medicine go down. You can shrink those pictures and you can get them to experiment. So, rather than a big picture, you shrink it in. rather than being right in front of your eyes, you tell them to put it over here somewhere. You drain the focus so it becomes a bit fuzzy. You can even take it further away from you. And I often say, and of course, it's all spiderwebby, because things that have got like spider webs in the distance. Oh God, that wasn't a good example to use, but anyhow, I probably do use that. But it's all sort of dusty. And that means it's old. It means it lives in the past. So that approach works pretty well with phobias sometimes. And the opposite is also true for the things we want to achieve. Because if you don't know what you're going to achieve, well, you might get lucky, but the chances are, law of intention, thoughts become things. Give those thoughts some structure for the consciousness to deal with. So thank you for that question, Andrea.
Thank you for your response.
What do you think about all that? I know you're a therapist.
Yeah, well, therapy comes into it, I suppose. I call myself practitioner, otherwise I get wrapped across the knuckles in France. So. Legally, I can't say that. Disclaimer. Yeah, that helps for me. I was getting the image of a camera lens, moving in and out, your photo in black or white, the cobwebby sort of thing. Yeah. I'm still, one of the difficulties I find for myself in visualization is that what you were saying about Jack Nicklaus, how you get this disassociated figure. I find myself so very often there as the observer, and it's lovely to be there as the observer, but is that, and I don't know if you've covered this in other talks, but recently, is how to get yourself more into the picture, as it were, in your mind's eye, without actually having been there. So, which is also linked to a lot of the difficulties for people coming out of trauma, and trying to visualize something different. Of course, we've got the havening to help us with that. But I know that working with people who are victims of psychological abuse, for example, and control, trying to get a visualization of themselves doing something is so very difficult for them. So is there anything that you could add on that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, severe physical and emotional trauma is very difficult, and it's not for therapists who don't have experience in this area, because you're absolutely right. The pictures they've got are those ones that are front and center of those terrible experiences they've been through, and it's going to take time to work with people like that. And there are techniques of relaxation that help, and you mentioned havening, that's certainly one of them. Hypnosis can help people because they can then disassociate a little bit from this immediate trauma that's in front of them. And the good news for them is that the default state, even for people who've been through circumstances like that, is some inner desire to come out the other side. I mean, that is just the survival instinct. Now, people like that, they don't know how to do that, and they have to be gently, skillfully guided. And the thing that comes to our aid is that human beings have a unique quality, which is called curiosity. And sooner or later, curiosity will kick in. Curiosity will ask questions like, well, I just wonder whether it's possible that I could do this thing. And once curiosity starts, then curiosity can be helped, because if they are really curious about what they might want to have in the future, they have to find a way of putting themselves in that picture, which sounds easy to do. And sometimes it can be quite easy to do, but many times it's not as easy as that. But they have to find a way, or their therapist or practitioner has to find a way to help them with that. And these people need help. That there are incredible people who do this on their own, but generally speaking, this is where people really, really need help. And we all know there's some stigma about mental illness these days, sadly, less now than there is, but there's still too much, and that certainly doesn't help. What do you think about that?
Thank you. Yeah, that we have so many modalities that are about, I think. I suppose it's each person finding what works for them and applying it and trying not to slip back. Keeping that ground that they've gained, and sort of the curiosity, as you say, which is something which is so stifled in trauma victims, because curiosity is don't take initiatives. Yeah.
I thought you were going to say curiosity killed the cat there.
Well, I mean, that's what we think, but of course,
Yeah.
you know, that's just an old wives' tale.
Yeah.
To think, yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's what you said is useful. I think for me, it's definitely finding what clicks for different people.
Yeah, what clicks for different people.
Mm.
And you're absolutely right. And it can be really helpful to know that. And also what clicks for us. Now, I'm going to take a wild guess that you're quite an auditory person, that you're quite into, you know, sound of words or sounds of anything. Was that right?
Absolutely correct. Yeah, I function. I get overload on visual,
Yeah.
so I function far better on the auditory level. So yeah.
Yeah, you see, and you gave me that clue straight away when you said, well, you know, this clicks, you know, that's a noise. Just as I was introducing this, I caught myself doing it. I said, you know, I'd seen a program or something that resonated with me. Now that's an auditory thing. And the other word that people use is like, it really chimed with me, or I felt tuned into it. If people say things like that, they're probably going to be very auditory. So
Yeah. Sorry.
yeah, no, that's it really. And obviously, you know, people who are more visual, they will come out with saying, well, you know, this wasn't a good picture, you know, I couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel, the words like that. And then the third sense really, which is what we feel, the kinesthetics. There are many people like that who are into feelings. You know, they don't look too much for words, which is probably good. And they say, you know, this just didn't feel right, wasn't comfortable in my own skin with what was going on, you know, had a bit of a few goosebumps and shudders, stuff like that, sort of visceral type stuff. So, you know, if to me the secret of therapy is to be incredibly aware. I was going to say observant, but then I'd have been falling into the visual trap, because it's more than visual. It's everything. Just being aware of as much as possible, having a broad arc.
Mm. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah. So, do we have any other comments or questions?
Yes. So can I ask, with this visualization, it's something I have always used. I build a picture. If I'm moving into a situation of any sort of stress or work on me, I create a picture in my mind of something that I like, a place I like to be. And the more I can paint on that picture, the better I feel about it. Now, what I sometimes worry about, I've got these two lads I try and help, and I'm not a teacher or anything like that whatsoever. And I do wonder if sometimes I might be doing more harm than anything else. So I can create a picture such in my mind of what I'm going to do or going to say party, that it can be far better, the picture in my mind than reality. And I wonder if I'm moving into what you said, the thoughts become things, or delusional.
Well, I would say both. I would say definitely that's law of intention, and that's thought becomes things. And delusional is a strong word. And by the way, it's a word that I like. I don't see that as a downside, quite frankly, because my view of the universe is that we are deluded. We're deluded about everything. Often, you know, sometimes only in a very small way, but we, you know, we when we're looking at a famous painting in an art gallery, every single person who looks at that is going to come to a different conclusion. They're going to see something different, or they're going to see different colors, because we are only ourselves. Ever since we were a baby and opened our eyes and we started processing visual images, we put those neurons together to make some kind of sense and order to it all. But the chances are that we all did it in slightly different ways and come up with slightly different things. But because it's consistent, we can point at this and say, that's green, that's color green, and we'll all nod our heads. So, and the words we use, I mean, that was what my last book, The Psychotic Revolution, was largely about. It's about the ambiguity of our language. When we learned to speak, which was about somewhere between 30 and 60,000 years ago, which is very, very recent in evolutionary terms, we lost a lot. We lost a lot of this nonverbal communication that had helped us through the millennia. And we replaced it with words which at best are a vague summary of highly complex thought. And that's why people get into trouble. That's why husbands and wives or partners that get divorces, because they misconstrue or don't understand. It's why countries go to war in extreme cases, because they're just not understanding the message from the other side. Because I don't think that most people want to get divorces. Most people don't want to go to war, but still happens. So getting back to, you know, sometimes you think you might be doing more harm than good. I think your visualizations are good. I mean, why not paint a rosy picture? I mean, we've all been to the dentists, and very few people like going to the dentists. But what you've just described is a very good strategy for going to the dentist. And I have to say, it's what I do. So, you know, I got nice big pictures that I'm thinking about. And if the dentist knew what I was thinking about, they'd probably run away. But they get me through. And they've got me through operations, you know, when I've meditated pretty heavily and, you know, because I've turned down a general anesthetic. So it can work. I don't see any harm in that. Don't see anything harms with something a bit delusional. And I don't see any harm with talking to a couple of kids, you know, about golf and you know, giving them a few hints, because they may not agree with what you say, and they may not resonate with them, or they may not be light bulb moments for them, but the chances are that they will think about it. And when Andrea was saying she works in France and she calls herself a practitioner, because if you're a therapist, you have to have more letters and more insurance and all the rest of it. And I've got German friends and colleagues who have the same issues. We're quite relatively lucky in one respect, because in the UK, because I think it's a bit more sort of wide open. I mean, you definitely have to have insurance, but I think it's a bit less prescriptive. I mean, I get insurance for all the things that I do, and as a doctor through the years, I've always, you know, second nature to have my insurance. But you know, increasingly now, when people say, "What do you do?" I say, "Well, I just talk to people," and I don't think anybody can fall into trouble with the authorities for talking to people. Well, I guess as long as you know, you don't talk about some subjects that might offend others, but just giving well-meaned advice to two other people, I would carry on, Ray. Quite sure those kids probably appreciate it.
The thing I find with it is that I've always used, and I do these things, and I wonder if you're actually tackling the challenge, or the system is helping you to get around that challenge. Because I find from my own point of view, I've done it for so long, I don't think too much about it. quite often come through something and it's finished, and you can't remember a lot of it. You just know you feel tired. And it makes me wonder, is it a good thing? Are you really tackling the situation, or are you creating something else you're going to have to deal with?
Well, you know, I can't comment specifically on that, but in general, I know that when I work with my clients, depending on how deep we have to go, very often when I get home later that day, I can't really remember too much about the session. I can't really remember because you see, you know, without even knowing it, I use light hypnosis with everybody all the time. I mean, I don't call it hypnosis. And of course, if I'm using it, it means that I'm doing the same to myself, because one of the first things you learn in hypnosis is that you have to go there first. But I've learned to trust the moment, to trust what, you know, comes up. That's which is why in previous shows we've talked about being careful about the danger of over planning stuff. Because if you over plan stuff, you've immediately put yourself into a box and you've limited the possibilities for which way the session could go. Because very often, you know, you think of things in a session and that you probably wouldn't have thought about in any other. You might not have even thought about them ever before. Just comes to you. I mean, like it's you know, go back to a golfing example. This lady that I was working with, she was really having problems driving. You know, the driver is the big club that you take off the tee and you want to hit it as far as possible. And it was getting into a lot of trouble. And I said to, you know, I'm going to cut a long story short, but I said to this lady, I said, look, you know, you've got to learn to love this club. I mean, you've got to learn how to use it. And she said, well, you mean, you know, do I have to love everything about it? Because it's getting me into trouble. And I said, well, look at it like a, you know, a bad boyfriend. You know, we all know what bad boyfriends are. They get you into trouble because sometimes you have to learn to live with them for a little while. So she said, well, are you suggesting that I should go to bed with my driver? I mean, the golf club, the driver. And I said, well, yeah, I was actually. Why not try it and see? So I had a text from her about a week later, and she said, I haven't been going to bed with the driver club, golf club in bed, but I allow it to sit. I prop it on the chair next to the bed. I said, okay, that's probably good enough. And anyway, the next time I saw her playing, she hit some fantastic drives. I mean, she hit one drive over 300 yards, which is a really long way for someone to hit a golf ball. So carry on with the good work, Ray.
Thank you. You've given me something to think about.
Yeah, well, that's the idea of these shows. I like people to think. You know, to me, a great show is when I don't really have to say too much. And I don't really like giving answers to questions. I mean, I'd rather sort of say things in a way where I'll give nudges for sure, if I can. If a nudge comes up to me in the moment, I will use it. So we're just about out of time, unless anybody's got something. We've got time for one more, but if otherwise, we can close this show. So thanks very much for coming along.
Can I make a comment on something you said earlier?
Of course you can.
You said people didn't really want to get divorced or start wars. And I think that's quite a thing, because one thing that people do like to do is be right. And that's often what gets them in the trouble, because they're right and the other person's wrong, whether it's countries or people.
Ego.
Yeah. Ego, exactly. But that, I think people see themselves in that being right and the other people being wrong. So actually being able to visualize something else or see it a different way or come at it a different is often, yes. Anyway, that was just a thought that occurred.
Well, that's a brilliant thought. And talking about visualization, I very much liked the where you are. You're obviously in the Caribbean at the moment, ready to enjoy your first gin and tonic.
Yes, in my kitchen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there you are. That's going to help visualizations. And when Ego jumped in with Ego, when Johnny jumped in with Ego, I mean, he was right on the money.
Absolutely.
It's because we do think that we're right, and we live in this polarized society now, right now, of instant rightness, of social media and all the other things, and I'm afraid it is tending to reinforce in people their prejudices, because it is more uncomfortable to live in a world of grey, 50 shades of grey, and it is seen as good, I guess, in some quarters, to be firm. This has to be the way. But to be more tolerant of other people is a challenge, but it's the only way we're going to get through stuff. I mean, we're a social species, and we wouldn't have got this far if we all thought we were always right. So that's a rather sort of, that's a dream for the future, but
it's something what I've sometimes done with people who said, okay, pretend you're the other person, like the partner or the thing, pretend, and tell me the story from that point of view.
Yeah, that can be very useful in therapy.
Yeah,
it can be eye-opening for the people. So yeah, I mean, this is the challenge of therapy, and it's great when you can get it right, when you can help people through stuff like this. But there is hope. I mean, there's more and more people who are interested in these kind of things, and I think we're going to only evolve as a species by being more tolerant. And if we can all be a little more tolerant at times, recognizing that people can sometimes be really irritating, then we'll be going in the right direction. Okay, well, thank you. As I say, we'll close out now because you've all got lots of other things to do this evening, I'm sure. And so thanks for joining us. We're back here next time.